Hey guys, so today I'm going to talk about Johnston chapter 9, which is called A Social Life. So in the beginning, he's talking about Jordan and how he's an ABA therapist that works with Bobby, and Bobby has aggressive and destructive behaviors. So Bobby's parents often give in to seemingly decrease Bobby's behaviors, but they ultimately reinforce it instead of punishing it. So, for example, Bobby is going to act in a certain way because he knows that his parents are going to give in. So, say they're in the store and he slaps his mom, because he wants a piece of candy. And she gives him the piece of candy because she seemingly doesn't want it to happen again. But he knows that when the next time, they're in the store, he can just slap his mom and she's going to give him the candy that he wants. That's just kind of like an extreme example. But, that's what I think about when I think about parents reinforcing the behavior, thinking they're going to decrease it, but it doesn't work that way. So basically, Bobby's situation is everybody in the house has aggressive interactions, like his siblings and his, parents and everybody. So that's just their norm. And so the problem is that Jordan has to find a way to change the family's culture, or, basically change the family dynamic, to teach Bobby more appropriate behaviors. And I think he will get into that a little bit later as well. So he first talks about culture. So our physical characteristics and our physical world mesh together and we get cultural free contingencies. So we learn things through non-social contingencies, such as our senses. So for example, if it's 100 degrees outside, we're not going to wear a coat. Now, if it's 32 degrees outside, I'm pretty sure half of us, if not all of us, are going to wear a coat, if it's that cold outside. So in this situation, social influences do not play a role. So then he goes into the definition of culture. So his definition of culture is everything that affects us that involve other people. And you can find that on page 165. And just based on going off that, he's saying how we learn much of our behavior and our verbal repertoire through other people and social interactions, which is our culture. And then we learn to respond to things based on the situation. So basically, if it goes against the values of a culture, we learn not to do it. So when I think of this, my example is we're not going to smoke in a place where smoking is prohibited because it goes against the values of that specific culture. Johnston also talks about how people think that their contributions come from their own mental processes, but he said that that's not correct. He's saying that the social contingencies still play a role in their behavior. So next, Johnston gets into natural selection. So he starts with saying Skinner's 3 ways on how natural selection underlies behavior. So first, contingencies of survival that deal with natural selection of species. Second, contingencies of reinforcement that deal with repertoires learned by their members. And third, special contingencies maintained by an evolved social environment. So those are the 3 ways that natural selection underlies behavior according to Skinner. He then gets into selection by cultural practices, and this is basically the main idea, and he spends basically the rest of the chapter talking about this. So he's saying that selection by cultural practices takes a long time, and this results in it being harder to study influences on practices. However, since they can study individual behavior, it can give them a pretty good idea of how things change over time. So next he talks about variation, transmission, and selection, and how they are essential for the evolution of cultural practices. He goes in a little bit of detail about variation and saying that variation has to be present in order, for cultural practices to be meaningful. So he gives the examples of wearing different hats in different situations. And it's similar to my example that I used earlier with wearing a coat when it's hot. So, you would wear different outerwear depending on the weather. So, you could wear like a cardigan or a hoodie if it's like slightly chilly, or you'll wear a thick winter coat if it's snowing. You'll wear a rain jacket if it's rainy, or you won't wear any jacket if it's hot and sunny. So Next, he concludes this section with talking a little bit more about transmission and selection, and he's saying how they result in social reinforcement. So then he goes into where can this lead? That is the head of the next one. So he talks about cultural shifts and how they happen often. So he gave the example of smoking. So he was saying that, smoking used to be widely accepted and now is not so much. So in this situation, my example, I would say breastfeeding. So in the past, women did not used to breastfeed in public, I should say. And, now they do it all the time. And, people embrace it. Mothers embrace it. Not everyone accepts it. They look at them kind of weird, like, why are you doing this in public? But at the end of the day, they need to feed their child. And if they're in a situation where they can't go anywhere else to feed their child, they're going to feed their child right there. And, people are becoming more open to it and people are more accepting to it now than they were in the past. So that's just an example of a cultural shift. And so then Johnston talks about how cultural practices play a role in obesity. So things like restaurants giving large portions, processed foods, appealing commercials and advertisement, and also like fast food places and low price foods, they all play a role in everything, and people try to come up with different tactics to change this behavior and, to help people lose weight or eat healthier, more of a sense. And, they don't always work. And, the government can come up with all these different laws, but they're not 100%. There's nothing that is going to work effectively, 100%, pretty much. And so next, Johnston gets into counter control. So basically, how I would define counter control is going against, undesired or unfair situations or changes. So basically it's something that you don't agree with and you're going to challenge it and you want to find a way to, get out of your situation that you are in. So this would be protesting, overthrowing politicians, strikes, slowing up your work, things like that. But Johnston was saying these are the things that we want to avoid. We don't want our challenges to end up in counter control. That's not the goal. The goal is, I guess, to all work together and try to avoid taking it to that next level. So Johnston is finishing up with talking about culture engineering. So he talks about a work culture. So I think that a work culture is who we have shared work experiences with and who we interact with at work. So the issue with work cultures is there is disagreement on how to change things in a work culture. So basically, if something has been the same way for so long, how do you go about changing it? And he's saying that, you have to look at the contingencies associated with the practice as a whole. That's kind of how he ends the chapter, on a question and just looking at the agency's culture. So overall, from this chapter, my take was that cultural and social contingencies influence everything that we do. And we have many cultural practices that are a part of our lives, and they also overlap with our verbal communities. So I know Johnston talks about this question a little bit that I'm about to ask you guys in the chapter, but I kind of want to just get you guys' thoughts on it and see what you think. So how would you go about changing something in your work culture if you did not agree with it? So you can answer this in any way that you want, but I am very excited to hear you guys' responses, and thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.